to the deep dive. So for this analysis, we're going to set aside all the usual suspects, inflation, geopolitical tensions, even the next election cycle. We're diving into a threat that's way more fundamental, one that's often just dismissed as a sort of private, trivial inconvenience, boredom.
Yeah, and it sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
It might even sound a little alarmist to frame an emotional state as a civilization-level problem.
It really does.
But our sources on this are, they are unequivocal. They argue that this chronic, pervasive boredom isn't just an irritation.
Right.
It is, and they frame it as the single greatest existential threat to human civilization.
Right.
Because it just silently corrodes our ability to act together and think long-term.
And that's really our mission today, to understand why. Why is the psychological vacuum so incredibly dangerous? What are the mechanisms of its sabotage?
And then to lay out the playbook.
Exactly. To analyze a clear, practical societal playbook that's designed specifically to fight it. We're sort of treating this as a shortcut to understanding that strategic fight against meaninglessness.
To really get the scale of it, we have to start with the definition. Because boredom, as it's defined in this research, it's not just having nothing to do.
Okay.
It's fundamentally a deficit of meaningful engagement. Or, to be more precise, it's the aversive experience of wanting to engage in satisfying activity but being unable to.
So it's that yearning for purpose, but you just can't connect with it.
That's it. And here's the core psychological finding that really brings this whole thread into sharp focus. This is the essential hook for the entire argument.
Let's hear it.
Humans will consciously choose harm over boredom.
Wow.
Yeah. The famous experiment where this was tested is frankly chilling. They put people alone in a room for 15 minutes with nothing but their own thoughts.
Okay, just sitting there.
Just sitting there.
Yeah.
But they were given an option to self-administer mild but painful electric shocks.
And people did it.
Over 2/3 of the men and 1/4 of the women chose to shock themselves. They preferred negative stimulation to just mental stillness.
So that drive to escape the internal void, that search for any kind of intensity, even if it's self-inflicted pain, is stronger than our basic instinct for comfort.
Yes. That flight mechanism is what fuels the societal damage we're about to get into.
It's the drive for immediate relief.
It is. Boredom is a far more effective destroyer of human potential than, almost any physical threat, because it compels us to self-sabotage just to feel alive.
Okay, so let's unpack that. How does this drive start corrupting the individual? The sources seem to detail this systemic corruption of our whole motivation system.
It starts with addiction.
Right.
The mechanism is a kind of psychological starvation. The brain, it gets desperate for stimulus to relieve that awful bored state, and it naturally prioritizes instant, high-reward, low-effort experiences.
Which is why you see the link to substance abuse.
It's the strongest correlation. Chemicals offer the quickest and most potent relief from that psychic void.
But it's not just chemicals, is it? It's the whole architecture of behavioral addiction.
Oh, absolutely. Compulsive technology use, endless scrolling, certain types of gaming, gambling, they're all high-intensity, low-effort solutions.
And they temporarily fill that existential emptiness?
Temporarily. But it's a self-perpetuating cycle. That superficial stimulation gives you a momentary fix, but it ultimately just deepens the underlying apathy.
And that chronic lack of any constructive meaning, it causes this kind of internal collapse.
It does. The sources note that the boredom signal, which, evolutionarily should prompt us to go find something new and constructive.
It backfires.
It backfires. It triggers negative rumination. It focuses our attention inward on feelings of inadequacy or despair, and that directly fuels anxiety, clinical depression, and just general apathy across huge parts of the population.
So if that's the individual collapse, we then have to look at how that search for intensity metastasizes into collective destructive behavior, the political and social sphere.
Exactly. When individuals move from self-destruction to searching for external drama, you see this flight toward clear, high-intensity conflict.
Ideologies.
Ideologies and conflict become these powerful, ready-made sense-making systems. They offer immediate purpose, a clear identity, and tribal belonging. They're all potent, immediate antidotes to meaninglessness.
And what's fascinating here is that the research cited shows that experimentally induced boredom. It leads people to endorse more extreme political views at both ends of the spectrum.
Right.
Why is that? You'd think people would drift toward one side.
And that's the critical insight. It's not the specific policy platform that's attracting them. It's the certainty. It's the emotional high and the clear structure that conflict
The
provides.
drama of
The
it.
drama of it. Extreme ideologies, left or right, it doesn't matter. They offer a sense of status gain, that feeling of being in the know, or a true believer and a ready-made enemy. And that provides immediate, absorbing drama where routine life provides none.
This sounds like a recipe for, total governance paralysis.
It is.
If the electorate is motivated by drama, then politicians and the media, they're just incentivized to create outrage to capture that bored public's attention.
That's the structural sabotage right there. This dynamic just paralyzes the rational, moderate deliberation you need for complex, slow-moving issues. Sustained civic engagement,
Hard
the
work.
hard, non-glamorous work of running institutions, community organizing, thoughtful voting. It's tedious, involves delayed gratification.
Which a boredom-habituated population finds profoundly unsatisfying compared to the rush of online outrage.
Which leads directly to mass political apathy. People just tune out the boring, necessary work, and they only tune in for the high-intensity scandal.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the most significant long-term impact isn't just paralysis, it's the death of our ability to solve the really hard problems.
The problems that require decades of sustained, difficult effort.
That's the death of deep work that the sources talk about. True innovation. The big scientific and philosophical breakthroughs. That requires sustained concentration. It requires a willingness to tolerate hours, days, even years of frustration.
The sheer boredom of research.
Exactly.
And we've lost the tolerance for that necessary frustration. A society that's habituated to instantaneous dopamine hits just loses the capacity for effortful, long-term, meaningful pursuits.
If you can't sit still for 10 minutes without reaching for your phone, how can you maintain the focus for 10 years to solve, say, fusion power?
You can't. Innovation gets relegated to these minor market-driven enhancements, a new app feature instead of foundational change.
And this cultural short-termism is just disastrous for any kind of effective long-term planning.
Think about climate change.
The perfect example.
It requires decades of politically difficult, incremental, and let's be honest, frankly, boring policies, infrastructure upgrades, regulatory changes.
Boring, but necessary.
And boredom mandates a focus on the immediate present and quick fixes. So the crisis is just too slow-moving compared to the daily media cycle of dramatic immediate conflict.
So if we synthesize this whole diagnosis, the conclusion is bleak, but it's crystal clear. Boredom is not the catastrophe itself.
No, it's not the war or the economic collapse.
It is the proximal cause underlying many destructive behaviors and the predisposing condition that makes a rational, collective human response to any of the other threats nearly impossible.
Exactly. It's an internal, self-replicating decay. It's like a cognitive solvent dissolving the psychological cement that holds advanced societies together.
Wow. That's a powerful reframing.
Yeah.
So if we've identified the source of the rot, the next critical step is to deploy the antidote. Let's pivot now to the practical strategy, the societal playbook for meaningful engagement.
Right. And this playbook, it's not about individual therapy. This is about rebuilding the social architecture.
Structural change.
Yes, structural change to maximize opportunities for purpose, for genuine challenge, community connection, and what the sources call reflected leisure.
Okay, so the sources provide a quick priority list of 10 key initiatives. Looking at those, what are the most crucial systemic reforms that need to happen now?
First and foremost, work redesign. We spend most of our waking hours working, so that environment has to be meaningful.
So what does that look like?
It involves encouraging what's called job crafting, allowing employees autonomy to sort of redefine their roles to align with their values, and replacing purely quantitative metrics.
With purposeful ones.
Exactly. Purposeful key performance indicators, or KPIs, that track actual impact or meaning, not just how many widgets you produced.
This is moving from measuring output to measuring a felt contribution. And there's a strong argument here for reduced work weeks too, right?
A very strong one. Piloting reduced work weeks, like the 4-day-week model, is cited as a key strategy.
Yeah.
The aim is to free up time, not for more mindless consumption,
So for engagement.
but explicitly for reflection, skill building, civic engagement, and caregiving. The metrics for success are tracked changes in employee engagement and their reported sense of purpose.
Okay, second point, technology. This is probably the biggest driver of superficial stimulation and maybe the hardest thing to regulate.
It's critical. The playbook demands regulation of what it calls attention harvesting design. The sources suggest concrete legislative action to reduce compulsive design patterns.
Like dark patterns and the endless scroll.
Exactly. eliminating those confusing design choices that trick users, and restricting the endless scroll feature, which removes natural stopping points.
But how do we enforce that without stifling innovation? What are those meaningful defaults you mentioned?
A meaningful default is just flipping the burden of choice. So for example, instead of autoplay being the default for videos, you, the user, would have to actively choose to enable it.
I see.
Or clear friction for addictive features could mean requiring a user to pause for 5 seconds and confirm before they resume an infinite scroll.
That flips the entire incentive structure. I really like the success metric they recommend for platforms.
Which one?
That they should be measured not by time on site, but by how many users convert online time into offline community action.
It forces platforms to facilitate genuine engagement. It connects the digital sphere back to the civic sphere.
And that brings us to the third systemic fix, civic service.
Yes, governments must launch major national, state, or local voluntary civic service programs.
So are these like military service?
No, they're skill-building civic impact roles, maybe 6 to 12 months long, for youth and also mid-career adults, and they have to be paid.
With stipends and resume recognition.
Right. The purpose is to combat alienation by providing immediate, ready-made purpose and structure. It's a potent, constructive alternative to finding meaning in extremist conflict.
Okay, moving beyond policy, the sources stress this need for a cultural overhaul, starting with education. We need to teach the tolerance for effort.
We have to. We need to reform curriculum to embrace necessary boredom as a skill, the ability to just sit with a problem long enough for real insight to emerge.
Which means moving away from rote memorization.
And towards sustained project-based learning that, by its nature, requires students to grapple with frustration and manage complex, multi-week challenges.
And the sources also emphasize that the curriculum needs to integrate reflection and identity, teaching students how to find purpose, not just what to memorize.
Absolutely. We need maker labs, arts centers, curriculum that integrates civic skills, identity exploration, and the practice of deep play hobbies that offer complexity and intrinsic reward.
We also need to normalize periods of, disengagement from the economic grind.
Right, which is why the sources push for policies around subsidized learning and sabbaticals. These programs would offer paid time off for reflection, creative projects, or caregiving.
It's acknowledging that meaning requires time and effort outside of constant work.
And that the human brain needs periodic maintenance. And while it's challenging economically, the sources argue that the cost of widespread societal apathy is ultimately far, far higher.
And culturally, the messaging has to change.
Yes, public campaigns that explicitly celebrate and normalize craft, slow hobbies, volunteering, civic engagement, we need to shift our cultural values.
So we've covered systemic fixes, cultural shifts. For the listener, what are the low barrier entry points? What can you start doing tomorrow?
Start local and small. The sources suggest organizing a local skill-sharing meetup, maybe a pottery class, a coding group, a neighborhood gardening club.
Simple stuff.
Simple stuff. Volunteer once a month. It's a low-barrier commitment that provides immediate, tangible meaning and connection.
And for employers, what's one easy step?
Run a job crafting week. Allow employees, maybe with a supervisor's guidance, to spend a few hours redefining just 10% of their role to align with a greater sense of purpose.
I like that. And for families?
Institute a weekly device-free creative night. Cook, build, garden, read together. Actively create those moments of shared, complex engagement.
Those are powerful, actionable steps. But if we implement all this, how will we know if it's actually working? How do you measure a reduction in meaninglessness?
You need objective metrics. Societies must track an engagement index. So the average time spent in creative, civic, or skill-building activities each week.
And you'd also want to track the negative indicators.
Critically, you have to monitor the prevalence of severe boredom-related psychological complaints and track clear reductions in addiction rates and self-harm statistics.
And finally, a key warning from the playbook. We have to avoid the pitfall of just focusing on individual symptoms.
Exactly. We have to focus on those structural fixes, not solely on therapy, to avoid the trap of over-medicalizing boredom.
This is a societal flaw, not a personal one.
Right. And all these interventions must prioritize under-resourced areas to ensure they don't widen existing societal gaps. The fix has to be equitable.
This entire deep dive has radically reframed what we should consider a serious threat. What's the core conclusion we should all carry forward?
I think it's that the defining challenge of the 21st century is the internal one. It's about consciously crafting a meaningful existence. We have to make the proactive, difficult choice to to choose the difficulty of meaning over the ease of distraction.
That is a stark, necessary reminder. The sources argue again and again that culture change is paramount. Policies and platforms, they can create opportunity, but long-term resilience requires a culture that deeply values stillness, craft, constructive challenge, and service. So final thought for you, the listener. Consider how you can lead this essential shift in your immediate environment. Start small, be patient with the boredom, and tolerate the effort. If civilizational failure comes, it won't be from invasion or a pandemic, but from the silent, self-inflicted entropy of meaning. Until next time, stay engaged.